Once again, welcome to tonight's Committee of Adjustment, and Ms. Murray has agreed to read the preambles. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our chair. Good evening. Due to the COVID-19 emergency, tonight's Committee of Adjustment hearing is being held by video conference and live streaming video on the town's live stream webpage at oakville.ca. This hearing is to consider applications for minor variance and consents held under the authority of the Planning Act. Please keep in mind the intent of this process is to review the application that is before the committee, listen to the evidence, and then make a decision. This process is not intended to be used to resolve any concerns or disputes that may exist between the town, individuals, or organizations. If a request for a deferral is made and the committee grants such a request, the applicant or authorized agent must contact the Secretary Treasurer to schedule a new hearing date. In order to conduct an effective and efficient electronic hearing, we have adopted the following process. If you're watching the live stream of this hearing on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to an item on the agenda, you can call 905 815-6095. And again, that's 905-815-6095. The phone number is also posted on the screen below the live stream at oakville.ca. Staff will be standing by to take your call. When you call in, staff will ask your name, item number that you wish to address, and your telephone number. Further instructions will be provided for you to call back to join the video conference. When the chair of the committee polls for interested parties, the Secretary Treasurer will unmute you when it is time for you to speak. The applicant or agent will be given the opportunity to briefly explain to the committee the basis of the application and answer any questions that may arise. A maximum of 5 minutes will be provided for a presentation. You will need to state your full name and address for the record. Any submissions beyond the 5 minutes will be at the discretion of the committee. All delegations must also state their full name and address for the record. A maximum of 5 minutes will be provided. All remarks and questions are to be directed to the chair. Any submissions beyond the 5 minutes are at the discretion of the committee. The applicant or agent will then be provided with a further 5 minutes to respond to the comments made by any interested parties and answer any questions from the committee members. If the applicant or agent has any concerns found in the staff report, particularly with any proposed conditions, this is your opportunity to advise us. The matter will then be taken into the committee for a decision. This will mark the end of all discussion. Any person desiring a notice for an application, notice of a decision for an application, must provide a written request, preferably through email to the Secretary Treasurer. Please note that you must make a written request in order to be included on the list that is used by a local planning appeal tribunal for giving any subsequent notice of any appeal. Written notice of the committee's decision will be mailed not later than 10 days for minor variance and 15 days for consents to the applicant and or agent and any person who filed a written request for such notice. If you do not agree with the committee's decision, you may appeal this to the local planning appeal tribunal. The last day to appeal the decision to the local planning appeal tribunal will be noted on the decision. Pass it over to the chair.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. We have regrets tonight from Chair McHale. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest tonight? Seeing none. Are there any requests, Madam Secretary, for deferrals or withdrawals tonight?
Mr. Chair, there is no request for deferrals or withdrawal.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we will start with, and we'll call these two items together, but we'll ask for separate motions at the end of the discussion. It would be file B20 2012 and CAVA B20/12 and CAVA 125/220 at 2372 Hickson Road. Madam Secretary, is the applicant on the line?
Yes, Mr. Joris Karen, he's going to present the application.
Thank you. And just, Mr. Karen, before we give you an opportunity to make a presentation, we'll just reiterate that if there's anyone watching this stream tonight and wishes to speak to these applications, you can call 905-815-6095. Again, 905-815-6095. Good evening, Mr. Kieran.
Good evening. Thank you for putting that up. Members of the committee, Joris Kieran, I'm the agent for the applicant. If you'd like, I can start a brief presentation.
Yes, it seems like you've gotten caught in a legal loophole, but for the committee's benefit and the audience, if you could give us a brief presentation, please.
Yeah, sure. It is fairly straightforward, and it is a technical variance and even a technical consent, I believe. It's basically relating to the inadvertent merger of these two properties when they were when the second property was purchased by the owner of the first property, with everything being in the same name, and therefore in this case, not sure the mechanism of it, but the titles merge and it becomes one parcel. And this happened several years ago, I think 3 or 4 years ago, but nobody was aware of it until properties. One of the properties was going to be sold, and then it came up. So through the course of that, the resolution was to be a severance, unfortunately, which is what we applied for and are proceeding with. And then it was brought to our attention that we actually needed a variance to legalize the lot frontage of the severed parcel because it didn't meet minimum requirement of 18 meters. That is what's highlighted on this slide. It's kind of small at the bottom there, but just with the red note on it, it's 16.76 meters. And that is what we are covering off with the variance component of this application in order to allow the consent to occur. That is about it, I think.
Okay, thank you. Committee members, any questions for the applicant? Seeing none, Madam Secretary Treasurer, are there any interested parties that wish to speak to this application?
There is no interest in anybody to speak in regards to the application.
Okay, thank you. And, committee members, then I would ask for 2 separate motions. One to deal with the consent first, and second to deal with the variance. Mr. Flemington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having reviewed the written application and also having taken into account the town staff report, which I do note is in support of, also noting that this is a technical consent that is being requested for. I also want to note that there was no oral or written objections from the public with regards to these applications. So first, with regards to B20/12, I'd like to move that the application be approved as applied for, finding that it meets the test of the Planning Act.
On the consent application, Mr. Flemington, you're satisfied that there's no need to go by plan of subdivision?
I am satisfied with regards to that.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. there's also no, required conditions. There are required conditions, correct? Sorry.
Can you make that conditional on the conditions in Appendix A?
Appendix A, thank you.
Thank you.
And that's what I'd like to move.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? That is unanimous. The motion carries. Mr. Flemington, if you could continue, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Now for application CAV A1252020. Under the same circumstances, having reviewed the application, I find that I'd like to move a motion that it be approved as applied for, finding that it is minor in nature, meets the test of the Planning Act. It's a technical request, and noting that there were no written or oral objections with regards to that application. And there are a required condition that the approval expires 2 years from the decision, our standard condition.
Thank you, Mr. Flemington. Mr. Kieran, you understand that the condition requires you to complete the severance within the 2-year time frame, seeing that you're not going to require a building permit?
Yes, we understand that.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion to approve? That is unanimous. Your application is approved.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
We will now move on to CAV A126 at 249 Gloucester Avenue. And again, if there's anyone watching this stream that wishes to speak to this application, if you can please call at this time, 905-815-6095. It's 905-815-6095, and you'll be provided with appropriate instructions. I see Mr. Barrett is on the line. Good evening,
Good
sir.
evening. Good evening, committee members, Mr. Chair, staff.
If you could please take us through a brief presentation.
Sure, gladly. As I mentioned, I'm Graham Barrett of 1575 Dundas Street West. I'm the agent for the owners of 249 Gloucester. We're proposing to demolish the existing 2-car garage. If you flip to the next slide, you can see a photo of the existing garage. Plan is to rebuild it almost identically, 1.54 meters closer to the street. If you flip to the next slide, you'll see a drawing of the proposed garage. The purpose here is to create additional backyard space for the owners and put in a small in-ground pool, mainly for their grandchildren. This garage is connected to the home via a breezeway, which is why variances pertaining to the entire dwelling are triggered. I've read the staff report. I agree with their opinions. I appreciate their support. They've been consulted along the way on this application. If you flip to the next slide, you can see we have a drawing here showing the existing garage in green. The proposed garage is the blue square, and the red square is a previously existing garage that was legalized by Committee of Adjustment back in 2008, I believe. It was torn down when the new house was built by owners 2 owners ago. So I've reached out to neighbors by mail, seeing as going door to door at the moment is difficult, and we obtained support from 2 close neighbors. Beyond that, I'd be happy to go through each variance if you like, but it's pretty simple. We're just shifting this garage slightly forward on the lot and actually reducing the coverage by about a square meter, something along those lines. There's one thing that I'd like to mention. I've read the conditions and we're fine with them. We have a condition stating that the garage be built in general accordance with the plan submitted, dated November 23rd. And in working with the zoning examiner, with Darren, some corrections were made to the numbers and adjustments were made to the site stats. There were no changes made to the plans, and the numbers on the public hearing notice are correct. Just wanted to bring this to your attention because the stats on the plans dated November 23rd are slightly different. Dwelling depth is a 4 centimeter difference. Lot coverage is a 0.05% difference, but the public hearing notice is 100% correct. Beyond that, we have neighbor support. We have no opposition that I'm aware of. Staff are in support, and I believe this proposal passes the 4 tests as set out by Section 45, Sub 1 of the Planning Act.
Thank you, Mr. Baird. Mr. Baird, does the committee have the site plan dated November 23rd?
Zoning should. It was submitted to staff. It should have been what was reviewed. Regardless, there were no changes whatsoever to the design.
Mr. Chair, the condition is addressed November 23rd. It's a,
Okay, thank you.
yeah, it's.
I mean, I can happily fire them over to you right now if you'd like via email, but there were no changes whatsoever in the public hearing notices.
It says the condition that elevation dated November 23rd.
Yes, the condition already reflects that. Thank you. Madam Secretary Treasurer, is there anyone on the call that wishes to speak to this application?
No, but Judy, member Judy, yeah, she wants to speak.
Okay, Ms. Murray, you have a question?
Yes, through you, our chair, to town staff. I'm reading something that says reissued for Committee of Adjustment November 24th, 2020 on the revision log.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. Which plan is that on? You said the site plan?
It is, excuse me, in the notes that were sent to us. Sorry, I'm trying to get a page. A5. Sorry, let me zoom out. It's the last page before Lakeshore Tree Services, Inc. Arborist Report.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't see an arborist report in my agenda set. I see a survey, a site plan, and then the fine lines, designs, plans that Mr. Baird had shared. I don't see an arborist.
No trees are being removed or harmed, so there is no arborist report at this time.
No, sorry, I was referring to the page number. I don't. I'm on right now. I'm on page. Is it 9 of 29? Issue date and revision log. Second revision reissued for Committee of Adjustment November 24th, 2020. Same thing on 8 of 29.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing that in the PDFs that I have.
Well, maybe Ms. Murray, I can suggest that if the committee chooses to find favor with this application, that whoever makes the motion just amend, just to clear up any confusion, just amend the proposed conditions. It seems like staff are satisfied that there's no changes, that it be built in general accordance with drawings as approved by the Director of Planning, and that way staff can sort out if there's any discrepancy in the drawings.
Thank you, Chair. Solid guidance.
Madam Secretary Treasurer, I'll just ask one more time before turning it to the committee whether anybody has called in on this matter.
Mr. Chair, there is no phone calls.
Okay, thank you. In that case, I'll close the discussion if there's no further questions and entertain a motion. Ms. Murray.
Thank you, Chair. Having conducted my site visit, reviewed the applicant's written submission as well as the town's written staff report, which I note that the staff is in support of, as well as the submission presented this evening. I will note that there does not appear to be any challenges from the public, but rather support indicated from neighbors sought by the agent, which is commendable. I would say that I am satisfied with the minor variance, that the application meets all 4 tests under the Planning Act, and I'm prepared to make a motion to approve the application variance subject to the following conditions: that the garage be built in general accordance with the revised site plan and elevation drawings, in accordance with the Director of Planning Services, and that the approval expires 2 years from the date of a decision if the building permit has not been issued.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. So that's an amendment to the condition to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning. All those in favor of that motion? That is unanimous. Your application is approved.
Great, thank you very much, and happy holidays.
Same to you. We will now move on to CAV A127 at 328 Douglas Avenue. Again, any members of the public wishing to speak to this application, this is your time to call, 905-815-6015-6095. Number should also be posted at the bottom of the screen. Good evening, sir. Mr. Tanner? You're on mute still.
Sorry, committee, how are you today?
Good, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
To give anybody that has an interest in calling in a little bit of time, if you could take us through a brief presentation.
Yeah, most definitely, not a problem at all. There was a previous application which was approved back in 2015, and we really use that as our driver for the application standards. We're coming in a little bit less this go around in 2020 versus the previous plan in 2015. The idea was to design a home that is very in keeping with the neighborhood, blends in with the community, isn't over dominating the streetscape. We are seeking a minor adjustment to the overall lot coverage, save for the exception of that item. Everything else is in general conformity to the bylaw, and we do feel that we're in keeping with what is happening in the within the neighborhood.
Thank you. Committee members, any questions for the applicant? Seeing none, Madam Secretary Treasurer, do we have any interested parties that wish to speak to this application?
No, we don't have.
Thank you. In that case, I will turn it over to the committee and ask for a motion if there's no other questions. Mr. Hardcastle.
I'll put forward a motion, Mr. Chairman. Having reviewed the written materials, undertaken my site visit, I am satisfied. I am satisfied that the requested variance conforms to the test of the Act. I'll put forward a motion of approval, subject to 2 conditions, namely that the dwelling be built in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevation drawings dated November 18th, 2020, and that the approval expires within 2 years of the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction. I would note that there were no members of the public present to make deputations with respect to this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve? That is unanimous. Your application has been approved, sir.
Thank you very much, committee. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
We will now hear application CAV A057 at 412 Watson Avenue. And again, if there's anybody in the viewing audience wishing to speak to this application, the number to call now is 905-815-6095. 905-815-6095, and staff will assist you. I see Mr. Capper's on the line, and I think the last time we saw this application, it was deferred with significant neighborhood opposition, and it looks like it's coming back tonight with significant support. So, Mr. Capper, if you please take us through your application.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for the record, my name is David Capper with Glenshnar & Associates, and our mailing address is 10 Kingsbridge Garden Circle, Suite 700, Mississauga, Ontario, L5R3K6. And to you, Mr. Chair, I have prepared a presentation for this evening. I think it's very much worth everyone's while going through the presentation, just so we can update staff and the committee as to how we have got to where we are currently.
I think there's been significant revision, so that would be helpful.
Certainly. I could get the next slide, please. By way of reference, the property at 412 Watson Avenue is located at the southwest corner of Watson and Maple Avenue. I've shown it here on the screen highlighted in red. Next slide, please. Just for your record, as you'd mentioned, this application is a revision of a previous application that was heard by the committee, at least for a request for deferral in July of this year. At that point in time, there was significant objections that we received from the neighboring property owners. And our advice to our client was that there is a potential for resolving some of those concerns, and that it's worthwhile seeking a deferral and seeing if we can revise the application to mitigate the concerns and come up with a better development proposal. The green dots that are shown on the screen here represent those neighbors that have provided letters of support to the committee. And sir, you'll note that although it's not part of the record because it was received about 45 minutes ago, which I will be forwarding to the committee for their records, the neighbor at 402 Maple, which is the property immediately to the west of the subject property, did provide a letter of support. And you'll note that those property owners were in objection to the previous development applications. Next slide, please. So the variances before you this evening, there are 5 of them. A couple of them are technical in nature. And then others are required to, well, they're all required to facilitate the development. The first application seeks to permit a driveway crossing a flankage lot line on a corner lot to be located closer to the intersection than is permitted in the bylaw. Bylaw requires a minimum of 15 meters, and the application seeks to permit a driveway setback of 7.6 meters. And we'll get into that variance a little further on in my presentation. There's a variance to permit a minimum flankage yard of 2.75 meters, where the zoning bylaw requires a minimum of 3.5 meters. I'll note that variance is sought for a flankage yard porch only, and that the majority of the building is set back beyond the minimum 3.5 meter requirement at 4.11 meters. There's a variance seeking an increase in residential floor area from the maximum permitted of 41% to the maximum to a proposed maximum of 43.56, and that results in a 2.56% increase, which is 16.8 square meters or 180 square feet. There is a variance to permit a reduction in the minimum required front yard setback, whereas the zoning bylaw requires a minimum of 8.31, and the proposal provides a setback of 7.58, which is a 0.73 meter decrease, moving the dwelling closer to the front lot line. And by way of record, the front lot line is defined in this particular lot as being the Maple Avenue frontage, despite the fact that the dwelling has been designed with so that it fronts onto the flankage yard. And finally, there's a variance to permit a maximum lot coverage of 26.43%, whereas the maximum permitted in the zone is 19%, which is a 7.43% increase in coverage. and that results in a 48.86 meters squared increase, or about 525 square feet. Next slide, please. Mr. Chair, this is the original proposal that was submitted back in July. You'll note a number of differences, notably the location of the driveway entrance, as well as the design of the property. If I could get the next slide, please, I'll be able to show the few areas of concern that were raised in the last submission, and that is predominantly the relationship between this dwelling and the rear yards of the adjacent properties to the west and to the south. In response to those concerns raised, the application was revised, and I can show that in the next slide, please. So that the building floor plan was, pardon the technical term, it was flipped so that the garage was located at the north end of the site and was oriented towards the Watson Avenue frontage, whereas before it faced the southerly property line. Next slide, please. In terms of the elevations, this is the elevation that one will see from the Watson Avenue frontage. Next slide, please. And this, sorry, that's the front elevation. This is the westerly or side yard elevation, and you'll note that the southerly portion of this elevation, there are no windows that are located in that area that was of concern to the adjacent property to the west, therefore eliminating any potential situations where you'd have impact to privacy being created from overlooked situations. And my apologies, that is the label rear is the incorrect label. That's actually the westerly elevation. Next slide, please. This is the elevation that is the technically front yard of the property. So this is the elevation that would be viewed from Maple Avenue. And finally, I believe we have in the next slide the rear elevation. And you'll note that there is a rear door that leads into the kitchen in this case, so that the rear yard actually does function as a rear yard in this particular situation. I believe that concludes all the points that I had to raise, with the exception of one matter. If I could ask for the committee's indulgence in the conditions that are forwarded by staff, if I could ask to flip back to the site plan, which is our fourth slide. One more. There we go. There is potential discussions with respect to the ultimate location of the driveway. Some concerns were expressed by the forestry department on whether the driveway should be located between what are best described as the first two trees or the second and the third tree. So I'd like flexibility to have that discussion with staff, and perhaps it would be appropriate to make a condition of approval that the driveway design be subject to the approval of the director of planning, just to provide some flexibility that should staff determine that that driveway needs to be located between the second and the third trees, that we have that flexibility. Certainly, it's my client's preference that the driveway be located as is proposed. However, we'd like to avoid the situation where we'd have to come back to the committee to receive a variance in that regard if staff does require it to be relocated. So that's it for me. I'm happy to answer any questions, should there be any.
Thank you, Mr. Capper. Very helpful presentation. Mr. Hassan, would you be in favor if the committee so chose to make it an approval conditional on development proceeding in general accordance with drawings to the satisfaction of the director of planning?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I would have no issue with that. I would also just include to the satisfaction of the Director of Development Engineering, just noting that this property would be subject to a development engineering site plan review, and the trees and driveway location are all looked at through that process. So planning and development engineering staff would correspond through that review.
Thank you, Mr. Hassan. Madam Secretary Treasurer, is there anyone who would like to speak to this application?
There is nobody to speak for the application.
Thank you. Seeing that there's no external interest, I would close discussion unless there's any questions to the applicant. Seeing none, then at this time I would ask for a motion. Mr. Hardcastle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having undertaken my site visit, reviewed the materials, including the written submission by staff and the presentation by the applicant, I am prepared to put forward a motion of approval, finding that the requested variances conform to the four tests of the Act. The motion would be subject to two conditions. The first being that the dwelling be built in general accordance with with a site plan drawing to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning and Development Engineering, and that the elevation drawings number 2 dated be consistent with the elevation drawings number 2 dated November 24th, 2020, and that the approval will expire within 2 years of the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued. I would note that there were no members of the public present with respect to this matter to make deputations on.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Any discussion on the motion to approve? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion? It's unanimous. Your application is approved.
Thank you very, very much, everyone. I hope next year is much better than this one, and I hope that everyone enjoys some time off over the holidays. Thank you very much for your service to the Committee of Adjustment. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Capper. We will now proceed to the next application of the night, which is CAV A074 2019 at 1192 Tisdale Street.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Just before we start the presentation, just one more reminder, if anybody is viewing this that wishes to speak to this application, if you can please call 905-815-6095, 905-815-6095, and staff will assist you. Good evening. If you could please take us through your application.
Absolutely. So this is a deferred application from June 2019. We had to redesign. We listened to one of the neighbors. They had an objection regarding overlooking. So what we did is we eliminated the entire second floor in this case. We maintained this house to be a bungalow. We are seeking 3 minor variances. The variance number 1 is the distance, the projection of the garage in front of the house. And this is happening because the existing bungalow did not have a garage, and we are proposing to add a garage. This house will be housing 3 seniors. So having an integral garage is really an important aspect, and hence the second variance was created as well. The proposed garage is too close to the property line. We did have a discussion and a letter of support actually from the adjacent neighbor. They have no objection to the garage being this close to them. The third variance would be at the back, the rear yard setback. So these are the 3 variances. We have 4 letters of support. So we are seeking your support as well.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any questions for the applicant? Seeing none, Madam Secretary Treasurer, are there any members of the public wishing to speak to this application?
There is no public.
Thank you. In that case, we will close discussion. I would ask for a motion. Ms. Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having conducted my site visit, reviewed the applicant's written submission, as well as the town's written staff report, which I note that the staff is in support of. as well as the comments presented by the applicant this evening. Thank you for the presentation. I am prepared to move a motion for the application of minor variance subject to the following conditions. That the addition be built in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevation drawings dated 2011-25 to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning, and that the approval expires 2 years from the date of a decision if a building permit has not been issued. I would also like to add that there are many letters in support from the community. Kudos to the team for working with the neighbors and for working with the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. Any discussion on this motion? All those in favor of the motion to approve? That is unanimous. Your application is approved.
Thank you so much, everyone, and happy holidays.
Same to you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that concludes our applications for this evening. We have confirmation of minutes from the December 8th, 2020 meeting. Moved by Ms. Murray. Thank you. And Mr. Hardcastle, motion to adjourn. Thank you. It is adjourned.